Merlin 3D, another dimension in network magic. Cisco's Product Security Incident Response Team. Three-dimensional security. Hey everybody, my name is John Capobianco and I have a whiteboard here to discuss this, but first I'm going to share my screen. Cisco, if you're not aware of this, has an API that's open to customers that lets you send a version of software against the API, and it gives you back a list of the security vulnerabilities against that version, as well as every piece of information around said vulnerabilities. So let's quickly take a look at the ecosystem. So this is, the security advisories publication listing, and we can sort them by, high, critical, whatever. The CVEs, last updated, the version, and we can expand these and get different information. Well, we can do this through an API and get all of this back as JavaScript object notation. But wouldn't it be great if instead of, something like this, which is pretty good, it's great, let's have some fun with it and make an actual scary security, something to really represent how scared we should be based on a high or a medium or a low. So this is the Security Incident Response Team's infographic. I recommend that you start here. It's a good idea of the infographic. It's an incredible service. And this is the Open Vulnerability API. And there's some documentation here you might want to read. And it's very easy to use, and it gives you great data back. Now, in terms of open source, it's difficult for me to share this because there's a token required. And I thought what I would do instead in the repository, in my templates, I've put a sample PSIRT report. So I'll come back to this in a second, but in the repository I have one of these reports for a certain version of software pre-canned that we can then use in Blender. Now, I have other code out there that you can use if you just want to automate the PSIRT for sure. But for this particular example, for Blender, this is what I've done with PyATS using the version parse, get the JavaScript back, and then key in on the version in this JSON. Go get my token, go get the version's PSIRT report, comes back as the JSON. I've saved it in a file. In terms of the repo, I'm moving it right here. Blender is going to Pythonically load this pre-canned file. And then here's what I thought we would do with it. I'm not much of a whiteboard artist, but that's supposed to be a skull, like a human skull. It's the best I could do. And again, this is just the X, Y, Z axes to give you a sense this is all going to be, three-dimensional. And what we have is 1, 2, above and below, 3, 4, left and right, and 5, 6 on the Z plane facing and behind it. As places I think we can put information from the JSON, the PSIRT report, like a floating set of data around the skull, and right below the skull in the color, this red and this red in the three-dimensional score. We'll put the score right below the skull. Well, they will be, I don't have a yellow marker. We'll have a scale, 10 through 0, and we'll just chop this into different materials. If it's over a 9, let's use the bright red. If it's between a 6 and a 9 or whatever, we'll figure that scaling out to have different materials. Now you notice I had the skull colored, eyes were red and the nose was, so what I'm going to do is make 2 skulls in the three-dimensional world, make one a little smaller than the other, just ever so slightly, and change its color. And then we'll have sort of this inner glowing jack-o'-lantern effect, if you will. But then we'll also put some spotlight colors that highlight, and we'll make those spotlights red or yellow or whatever. So the outer skull will be colored, the inside will be glowing. We'll have information, the timestamps and the different CVEs all around it, maybe like a nuclei. And we'll scale a skull, one skull for every advisory that we find. And I'll show you that real quick, how we're going to do this theoretically. If I collapse the JSON, right, we can see advisories is a big list, and then each different advisory ID for that version. Right, so this one is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 skulls. And then from this information, we have quite a bit of information to choose from. And we'll have to be careful. Look at the product names, all these. We don't want to fill our 3D world with all of these, right? So we'll pick and choose different fields of information to hover around the skull. All right, so let's try that in 3D world. That's the conceptual view. And what I'm going to do is, I've started with some objects here. Let me show you them that I've converted. I'm going to open. I went ahead and found the PSIRT logo and turned it into this nice three-dimensional Product Security Incident Response Team logo that we can place in the, as a report kind of header. And I'm not going to change the coloring or anything. That's their default color pattern. And then I have a, obviously the Merlin logo that you've probably seen. And I have the powered by PyATS that we'll add, the PyATS logo. And then here is the skull. And here's the skull is in my assets. So this is the skull that I found, and it was a downloaded. I didn't create this. It was a free 3D skull that was out there on the internet. And I just imported it into Blender.